The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic for what he believed would be another ordinary day of duty. He had served the royal family for 15 years, standing guard through countless ceremonies, state visits, and quiet moments that the public never witnessed. But today would test every fiber of his loyalty and training in ways he never imagined. James had always been different from the other guards. While his colleagues maintained the traditional stoic silence, he possessed an unusual gift for connecting with animals. This talent had made him the unofficial caretaker of the Queen's beloved Corgis whenever duty called him near the royal apartments. The dogs seemed to sense his gentle nature beneath the stern military exterior. The late Queen Elizabeth had passed away 3 months earlier, leaving behind not just a nation in mourning, but also her cherished pack of corgis. These weren't just pets to Her Majesty. They were family members who had shared her private moments, her joys, and her sorrows for decades. James had witnessed firsthand how the Queen's face would light up when her furry companions entered the room, how she would speak to them in soft, loving tones that contrasted sharply with her formal public demeanor. Among all the corgis, there was one that held special significance, a gentle female named Whisper. She had been the Queen's constant companion during her final years, rarely leaving her side even during official duties. Whisper had an unusual white marking on her chest that resembled a crown, something the Queen had always found endearing. The dog seemed to understand human emotions in an almost supernatural way, offering comfort during difficult times and sharing in moments of happiness. After the Queen's passing, the surviving corgis had been redistributed among family members according to her wishes. Most went to live with Prince Andrew and other relatives who could provide them with loving homes. However, Whisper remained at the castle, seemingly waiting for her beloved mistress to return. The staff noticed how the dog would still walk to the Queen's favorite sitting room each morning, looking expectantly at the empty chair where Her Majesty used to read her correspondence. King Charles III had been dealing with the enormous responsibility of his new role while also managing the emotional weight of his mother's death. The transition period was challenging for everyone in the royal household, including the staff who had served the Queen faithfully for decades. There was an unspoken understanding that everyone was grieving in their own way, from the highest-ranking officials to the kitchen staff who had prepared the Queen's simple breakfast every morning for years. Camilla, now Queen Consort, was also adjusting to her new position and the expectations that came with it. She had her own preferences and ways of doing things, which sometimes clashed with the long-established traditions of the household. While she genuinely cared for the family, including Charles's devotion to his mother's memory, she also felt the need to establish her own routines and make practical decisions about the day-to-day running of their residences. James had noticed subtle changes in the castle's atmosphere since the Queen's death. There were new protocols, different schedules, and a general sense of uncertainty as everyone adapted to the new reign. The staff tried their best to maintain the standards and traditions they had always upheld, but change was inevitable. Some adjustments were necessary and welcomed, while others felt like departures from cherished customs that had defined the royal household for generations. On this particular morning, James was assigned to patrol the private gardens behind the castle. It was a peaceful duty that he enjoyed, as it allowed him to observe the changing seasons and occasionally encounter the castle's animal residents. As he walked along the familiar paths, he noticed Whisper sitting alone on a stone bench that had been the Queen's favorite spot for morning tea when the weather permitted. The corgi's posture suggested she was still waiting, still hoping for a reunion that would never come. The sight tugged at James's heart. He had seen many touching moments between the Queen and her dogs, but this display of loyalty from Whisper was particularly moving. The dog's unwavering devotion reminded him of his own commitment to serving the crown, a dedication that went beyond mere duty and touched something deeper in his character. He approached slowly, speaking in the gentle tone he had learned the Queen used with her pets. Whisper looked up at him with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to recognize his kindness. James knelt down and gently stroked her soft fur. Remembering how the Queen had performed this same gesture countless times. For a moment, he felt connected to the continuity of service that defined the royal household. The passing of responsibility from one generation to the next, the preservation of traditions that gave meaning to their roles. As he continued his patrol, James reflected on the changes happening around them all. He understood that adaptation was necessary, that the new king and queen consort needed to establish their own way of doing things. But he also believed that some traditions, especially those connected to love and loyalty, deserved to be preserved. The Queen's corgis represented more than just pets. They were living symbols of her humanity, her capacity for unconditional love, and her ability to find joy in simple pleasures despite the weight of her responsibilities. Unknown to James, decisions were being made inside the castle that would soon test his convictions and force him to choose between following orders and honoring what he believed to be right. The morning's peaceful moments with Whisper would soon be remembered as the calm before a storm that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his role as a guardian of royal traditions. The sun climbed higher in the sky, burning away the morning mist and revealing a day that looked deceptively normal. But beneath the surface of routine and protocol, emotions were building toward a confrontation that would reveal the true character of those involved and the strength of bonds that transcend official duty. The afternoon brought unexpected activity to the usually quiet corridors of Windsor Castle. James had finished his garden patrol and was preparing to take his position at the main entrance when he noticed unusual movement in the private wing. Staff members were hurrying about with an urgency that suggested something significant was happening, though their faces revealed nothing of the nature of their tasks. Lady Margaret Thornberry, the Queen Consort's private secretary, emerged from the royal apartments carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone dealing with a particularly challenging situation. She spotted James and approached him with measured steps, her professional demeanor masking whatever emotions might be stirring beneath the surface. "Sergeant Mitchell," she began in her crisp tone, "Her Majesty the Queen Consort requires your assistance with a rather delicate matter. You are to report to the Blue Drawing Room immediately." The formality of her language and the tight set of her mouth suggested that this was not a routine request. James had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when royal business was more complicated than it appeared. As James made his way through the familiar corridors, he passed several staff members who averted their eyes or offered sympathetic looks that puzzled him. The castle's intricate network of servants, guards, and officials often knew about developments before they became official, and their reactions suggested that whatever awaited him in the Blue Drawing Room was already a topic of hushed conversations in the servants' quarters. The Blue Drawing Room was one of the Queen Consort's preferred spaces for conducting private business. Its elegant furnishings and soft lighting created an atmosphere that was both formal and comfortable, suitable for discussions that required discretion. As James approached the ornate doors, he could hear voices inside, Camilla's distinctive tone and that of someone else he couldn't immediately identify. When he knocked and was admitted, James found the Queen Consort seated in a high-backed chair, her posture reflecting both authority and a hint of frustration. Beside her stood Dr. Caroline Webb, the royal family's veterinarian, holding a leather leash that James recognized with a sinking heart. At the other end of the leash sat Whisper, the corgi he had comforted just hours earlier in the garden. Camilla looked up at James with a mixture of determination and what might have been regret. "Sergeant Mitchell, thank you for coming so promptly. I have a task for you that requires both discretion and efficiency." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Whisper here needs to be relocated to more suitable accommodations. Dr. Webb has identified an excellent facility where she will receive proper care. The words hit James like a physical blow, though his training kept his expression neutral. He understood immediately what was being asked of him, and the implications sent his mind racing. This wasn't just about relocating a pet. It was about severing one of the last tangible connections to the late Queen's daily life. Whisper represented continuity, memory, and the personal side of a monarch who had been beloved by millions. Dr. Webb stepped forward, her professional manner unable to hide her own discomfort with the situation. The facility is quite reputable, Sergeant. Whisper will have excellent care, spacious grounds, and companionship with other dogs. It's really for the best, given the circumstances. Her words sounded rehearsed, as if she had been practicing this explanation, trying to convince herself as much as others that this was the right decision. James looked down at Whisper, who seemed to sense the tension in the room. The dog's tail wasn't wagging, and her ears were slightly back, signs of anxiety that James had learned to recognize during his years of interaction with the royal pets. It was as if Whisper understood that something significant was about to change in her world, something that would take her even further from the life she had known with her beloved queen. "Your Majesty," James began carefully, "might I ask about the specific reasons for this relocation? Whisper seems to be adapting well to the current arrangements, and the staff has been quite capable of maintaining her care." He was walking a delicate line between respectful inquiry and potential insubordination, but something inside him compelled him to speak for the voiceless creature before him. Camilla's expression tightened slightly. "The decision has been made based on practical considerations, Sergeant. The castle's routines are changing, and it's simply not feasible to maintain the previous arrangements for all of the late Queen's pets. Whisper will be much happier in an environment specifically designed for her needs." Her tone suggested that the discussion was meant to be brief and conclusive, but James found himself unable to simply accept the explanation. His mind flashed to memories of the Queen's devotion to her corgis, the way she had spoken about them as family members rather than mere possessions. He remembered overhearing her tell visitors that her dogs were among the few beings in her life who loved her simply for who she was, not for her title or position. The thought of Whisper being sent away felt like a betrayal of that trust. "With respect, Your Majesty," James continued, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil building inside him. "The late Queen had very specific wishes regarding her corgis. She spoke often about their importance to her well-being and made arrangements for their continued care within the family." He was venturing into dangerous territory, essentially questioning the decision of his new sovereign, but his conscience wouldn't allow him to remain silent. The room felt quiet, except for the soft sound of Whisper's breathing. Dr. Webb shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. Lady Thornberry, who had been observing from near the window, stepped forward as if to intervene, but Camilla raised a hand to stop her. "Sergeant Mitchell," Camilla said, her voice taking on a sharper edge, "I appreciate your concern for the animal's welfare, but this matter has been decided. Your role is to escort Whisper to the vehicle that will transport her to her new home. Dr. Webb will accompany you to ensure the transition goes smoothly." She stood up, clearly intending to bring the conversation to a close. James felt the weight of his uniform, the symbols of his oath and service, pressing against him like a physical burden. He had sworn to serve the crown faithfully, to follow orders without question, to maintain the dignity and traditions of his position. But he had also witnessed the love between the late Queen and her dogs, had seen how these animals provided comfort and joy in ways that nothing else could. The conflict between duty and conscience was tearing at him in ways he had never experienced. Whisper looked up at him with those intelligent brown eyes, as if sensing that he was her only advocate in a room full of people who had already decided her fate. The trust in that gaze reminded James of similar looks he had seen the Queen give her beloved pets, moments of pure connection that transcended the formal boundaries of royal protocol. The silence stretched on, filled with tension and unspoken emotions. James realized that this moment would define not just Whisper's future, but his own understanding of what it truly meant to serve with honor. The easy path was clear. Follow orders, escort the dog to the waiting vehicle, and return to his duties. But something deeper was calling to him, a voice that spoke of loyalty to principles rather than just positions, of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As he looked around the room at the faces watching him, James understood that his next words would change everything. The comfortable predictability of his service was about to end, replaced by something uncertain, but undeniably necessary. The late Queen's Corgi needed a champion, and despite the consequences, James knew he couldn't walk away from that responsibility. James took a deep breath and looked directly at Queen Consort Camilla, his voice calm but resolute when he finally spoke. "Your Majesty, I cannot in good conscience carry out this order. Whisper was more than a pet to the late Queen. She was family. Her Majesty made it clear that her dogs should remain where they could continue to feel her presence and be surrounded by people who understood their importance." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Webb's eyes widened in shock. Lady Thornberry's mouth fell slightly open, and Camilla's face flushed with a mixture of surprise and anger. In 15 years of service, James had never directly refused an order, let alone one from a member of the royal family. But as he looked down at Whisper, still sitting patiently despite sensing the tension around her, he knew he had made the right choice. "Sergeant Mitchell," Camilla said, her voice dangerously quiet, "are you refusing a direct order from your queen?" The formal weight of her words was intended to remind him of the serious nature of his defiance, the potential consequences of his stand. Around them, the elegant room seemed to hold its breath, as if the very walls understood the gravity of this unprecedented confrontation. James straightened his shoulders, feeling the full weight of his uniform and everything it represented. "I am upholding my oath to serve the crown faithfully, Your Majesty. That oath includes protecting the wishes and memory of our late Queen Elizabeth, who entrusted me and others with the care of those she loved. I believe removing Whisper from the castle goes against those sacred wishes." The mention of Queen Elizabeth seemed to strike a chord in the room. Even Camilla paused, perhaps remembering her own relationship with her mother-in-law and the complexity of stepping into such a revered position. For a moment, her stern expression softened slightly, revealing a glimpse of the woman behind the title who was also navigating unprecedented circumstances. Dr. Webb cleared her throat nervously. "Perhaps we could consider alternative arrangements? There might be ways to accommodate Whisper's needs while keeping her closer to familiar surroundings." Her suggestion was tentative, clearly meant to offer a compromise that might diffuse the escalating situation, but James shook his head firmly. "With respect, Dr. Webb, Whisper doesn't need alternative arrangements. She needs to stay here, in the place that was her home with the Queen. She's been waiting in the garden every morning, sitting on Her Majesty's favorite bench. She's grieving too, and sending her away would be cruel when she's already lost the person she loved most." His words painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. The image of the loyal Corgi maintaining her vigil, hoping for a reunion that would never come, touched something deep in everyone present. Even Lady Thornberry, known for her strict adherence to protocol, seemed moved by the description. Camilla stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the gardens where James had found Whisper that morning. For several long minutes, she gazed out at the grounds where the late Queen had walked daily with her beloved dogs. When she finally turned back to face the room, her expression had changed from anger to something more complex, a mixture of understanding, frustration, and perhaps respect for James's courage. "You realize, Sergeant, that your refusal to follow orders could result in your dismissal from service," she said, though her tone had lost some of its sharp edge. "You're risking everything you've worked for over the past 15 years for the sake of a dog." Her words weren't entirely accusatory. There was almost a note of curiosity, as if she was trying to understand what could drive someone to take such a risk. James nodded solemnly. "I understand the consequences, Your Majesty, but I also understand that some things are more important than my career. The late Queen showed me what true loyalty looks like through her love for her corgis. She never abandoned them, no matter how difficult the circumstances. I cannot abandon Whisper now, when she has no one else to speak for her." The passion in his voice was evident, but it was controlled, respectful, and rooted in genuine conviction rather than mere rebellion. This wasn't a guard challenging authority for the sake of defiance. This was a man standing up for principles that went to the heart of what service truly meant. Whisper, as if sensing that she was the center of this important discussion, walked over to James and sat beside him, leaning slightly against his leg. The simple gesture of trust and companionship spoke louder than any argument could. Here was a living connection to the beloved Queen, seeking comfort from someone who understood her value beyond mere convenience or practicality. Camilla observed this interaction carefully, and something in her demeanor shifted. Perhaps she remembered her own pets, or thought about the profound bond she had witnessed between her husband and his mother. Maybe she considered how history might judge decisions made during these early days of the new reign, or simply recognized the genuine love that motivated James's stand. "Tell me, Sergeant," she said, returning to her chair but maintaining eye contact with him, "what exactly do you propose? We cannot simply ignore the practical realities of running this household. Changes must be made, routines must be adjusted. How do you suggest we accommodate Whisper's needs while managing our responsibilities?" The question surprised everyone in the room, including James. Instead of ordering his immediate dismissal, the Queen Consort was asking for his input, treating him as someone whose opinion had value. It was an unexpected turn that offered hope for a resolution that could honor both duty and compassion. James considered his response carefully. "Your Majesty, Whisper could remain in the staff quarters during the day, where she's familiar with the people who cared for her with the Queen. She could have access to the private gardens where she feels closest to Her Majesty's memory. The cost would be minimal, and the staff would gladly take on any additional responsibilities. She wouldn't interfere with official functions, but she would remain where she belongs." Dr. Webb nodded enthusiastically. "That could work very well. Whisper is well behaved and accustomed to the castle's routines. The staff members who knew her with the Queen would provide excellent care, and the familiar environment would help her adjustment to this difficult transition." Lady Thornberry, ever practical, added, "We could establish specific protocols for her care that wouldn't disrupt the household's operations. It might even serve as a positive symbol of continuity and respect for the late Queen's memory." Camilla listened to these suggestions in thoughtful silence, occasionally glancing at Whisper, who remained calmly beside James, as if understanding that her fate was being decided. The room felt different now, less confrontational and more collaborative, as if James's stand had opened a door to honest dialogue about what really mattered. Finally, Camilla spoke, her voice carrying a warmth that had been absent earlier. "Very well, Sergeant Mitchell. Whisper will remain at Windsor Castle under the care of the household staff. However, this arrangement will be reviewed regularly to ensure it continues to serve everyone's best interests, including her own." The relief in the room was palpable. Dr. Webb smiled for the first time since the meeting began. Lady Thornberry made notes on her clipboard with obvious satisfaction, and James felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't fully realized he was carrying. But Camilla wasn't finished. "I must also say, Sergeant, that while I cannot endorse the method of your protest, I respect the principles that motivated it. The late Queen valued loyalty above almost all other qualities, and you have demonstrated that loyalty extends beyond convenience or comfort. However, in the future, I hope you will bring such concerns to my attention before they reach the point of direct refusal of orders." James bowed his head respectfully. "Of course, Your Majesty. I hope never to find myself in such a position again, but I am grateful for your understanding and compassion." His relief was evident, but so was his continued respect for the authority he had challenged. As the meeting concluded and the various participants prepared to leave, Whisper remained close to James, as if recognizing him as the one who had stood up for her when she couldn't speak for herself. The bond between them had deepened through this shared experience, creating a connection that would endure for years to come. Later that evening, as James completed his duties, he reflected on the day's events. He had risked everything he had worked for, but in doing so, he had discovered something valuable about the true nature of service. Sometimes protecting what matters most requires the courage to stand against the current, to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, and to honor the deepest values even when doing so comes at personal cost. Whisper spent that night in her familiar bed in the staff quarters, surrounded by people who knew and loved her. In her dreams, perhaps she walked once again through the castle gardens with her beloved queen, their bond unbroken by death or the passage of time. And in the morning, she would return to her vigil on the stone bench, but now with the knowledge that she was truly home, protected by those who understood that some loyalties transcend convenience, hierarchy, and change. The story of Sergeant James Mitchell's stand became part of Windsor Castle's unofficial history, passed down among staff members as an example of what it means to serve with true honor. It reminded everyone that the most important battles are sometimes fought not on distant battlefields, but in quiet rooms where individual conscience meets institutional authority and where the courage to do right matters more than the ease of following orders.